I have come to realize that my notes themselves look like rhizomes, and if I could draw lines, arrows, and create a map between the pages of my notebook, these relationships would become a three-dimensional sphere, visually representing the connections between thoughts and patterns in the meta-narratives of rhetoric. My notes have become a way for me to visualize my understanding of rhetoric, and therefore shift the ways I understand my place in a world. If we are trying to define rhetoric, and indeed as a field rhetoric is constantly historicizing itself, we would be and are hard-pressed to come to an agreement of what rhetoric's goals, methodologies, and takeaways are. But that doesn't mean that this goal is impossible, and that we shouldn't try to better understand where we fit in our rhetorical network. Historically speaking, the goal of rhetoric is to persuade an audience, to inform a group of citizens who might not have the ability or the want to gather information about a problem and provide them with a call to action so they can make a change in their own communities. This definition is dated, yes, but not outdated. In our first-year composition classrooms, the end goal of the entire semester is for students to be able to employ the rhetorical triangle to think rhetorically about their situations, writing, and research. But in using the term rhetoric to define what we're asking students to accomplish, aren't we limiting the extent to which we and they can fully comprehend what this thing is that we're asking them to use and understand? First, we would need to examine the change in what is considered a public sphere. In ancient Greece, a public sphere would be a physical representation. However many people could gather at the sight of a speech and hear what was being said was considered a gathering of the masses, although this wasn't without limitations. It was only those with a certain level of political involvement who were allowed into those meetings. This sphere has continually evolved with changes in technology. Scrolls, books, and newspapers have increased the public sphere to those who can read, but have changed the accessibility of information from those who can hear and listen to only those who have been taught and have the skill of reading printed text, further limiting who has the ability to participate in discourse communities. Our current public sphere is a virtual space. It exists only in the rhizomes and networks that we are able to perceive. Now that we have entered into a digital age, we not only have accepted and perpetuated the need for listening and reading skills, but have also increased the need for internet access and a working knowledge of these technologies in order to take part in discourse environments. This speaks to our adaptability as humans. We are in a constant state of reattunement to the world around us and the skills that we need to develop in order to become successful and participate in ongoing conversations. This new attunement to a world connected by typefaces and screens is allowed to happen because rhetoric reveals and constitutes the informational environment within which we flourish, and is thereby the emergent result of many complexly interacting agents dynamically attuned and exposed to one another, an attunement that may be as competitive as it is cooperative, as long as it maintains an ecological relation or connectedness to the world round about. What Rickert means here is that rhetoric is abundant and intertwined in our everyday lives, and attunement comes from our understanding and focus on the ambient forces around us. Okay, so what is ambience? I think of it as the minute details of the world around us. The music in the background, the cars driving around us on the highway, the birds flying in the sky, the state of the weather. Essentially the things that make up all parts of a moment or memory, no matter how small. Ambience has to do with the way the world reveals itself, to transform our experience of place itself. Ambient rhetoric, analogically, brings the world to us, but in doing so transforms the disposition of our inhabitancy. So for Rickert, rhetoric has been reworked into an ambient perspective in which the world is revealed differently, not solely in a subjective way, but in a way that still calls for some action. Although the way that we use and understand rhetoric has shifted, rhetoric still informs our understanding of the world and the way that we construct our own identities. In fact, using Rickert's model for an ambient transformation of our world, what I call my identity is the product of an identification with figures or symbols that reside outside myself, and my identification depends on shared meaning, on the intervention of already meaningful figures. Diane Davis asserts that responsibility is not a matter of freedom. Your capacity and desire to effect change is already a function of your inescapable responsibility. In speaking directly to rhetoricians, she is asking not that we actively induce change, that's what we do already by nature, that we resist our immediate urge to take action and instead listen to what our audience wants from us and our inherent responsibility to respond. The experiences that we have had and the ways that we are attuned to our own view of the world will impact the ways we react and respond to situations which can be characterized as rhetoric's flaw. Rhetoric can be a force that brings people together to work toward a common goal, but it can also be a force that drives people apart based on different cultural meta-narratives and worldviews. Jenny Rice works towards addressing this rhetorical flaw, claiming that some exceptional rhetorical subjects imagine themselves to be part of a wider public simply by feeling. The problem for Rice does not lie in the feeling itself, but in feeling too often. Rice asked for rhetoricians to stop pushing for an end result, often brought about by our interpretations, our want for the world, and instead use inquiry to rework the network rhizomes that we have come to accept as true. Rice defines public subjectivity as the roles we inhabit when we speak and act about matters that put us into relation with others, as a kind of being in the world. And through her method of inquiry, instead of seeking resolution, the inquiring subject seeks to uncover the composition of a given scene. What are the relations that give it shape and form? So the subject is implicated within the process, and that relational position is also revealed in the act of investigation. Most importantly, the goal of inquiry is not always resolution. As uncomfortable as this seems, it may be beneficial for our students if they work to achieve knowledge by asking questions that are meaningful to them. An archive will be creative that shows a similar result to a network, but one that has been created through an inquirer's questions, and neither of these methods invokes a relationship to feeling. We must work as a field to redefine what rhetoric is. How do we explain such an intangible idea that permeates so much of what we do culturally, ethically, and judicially? In simplistic terms, how do we relate to one another? The attunement that we develop to our own understanding of the world we dwell in, and how we incorporate the forces of others' experiences into our own understanding, shapes our definitions of rhetoric into something that still embodies persuasion, but in a different context than our original meta-narrative would suggest. Rhetoric is a transcendental force that pervades, even unconsciously, what we do and say, affects how we relate to one another, fills the space we share, and influences the rhizomatic relationships which build our own public sphere, and is perpetually shifting, influencing, and changing the ways in which we view the world.